I was telling my fiance, I was like, the Avs are getting to the point where I'm starting to care as much as I do about OU football, and like this is a
Wow.
very unhealthy road that I'm going down. Because at least in the fall, I have like all spring and summer to like relax. I'm not super invested in much, and now I just feel like at least 10 years of my life is going to be shortened just by having like full year always stressed out.
Well, what the regular season ends in like mid-May, early May.
Yeah, I think playoffs have been going for playoffs have been going for probably about a month and a half, so it may be a late May, early mid May, somewhere in there. Yeah, you're spot
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So I guess I'm thinking of that from a Thunder fan perspective. Like, yes, sometimes my fandom goes into June and sometimes it
Yeah.
ends in like December because of tanking. But you get some of your life back depending on,
Yeah,
how the team trends over the years. But
that's
yeah,
fair.
hopefully
Well,
they can.
talking about hot
Yeah.
trends, Adam.
Yeah. No kidding.
OU baseball, let's have it.
Yeah, just an unprecedented run to the College World Series. A team that I don't think, I mean, any of us really saw coming, except for maybe inside that locker room. And you look at the trajectory of this entire season, dropping 3 games in a row at the Shriners Classic at Minute Maid Park, losing some heart wrenching series against Texas and Oklahoma State, losing at home to New Orleans, and then the season turns around after that Texas series down in Globe Life, which is kind of interesting. Maybe that should have been a norm. Maybe that would have been the start of the run. But regardless, this team found its groove and they just tore through the competition since that point. They kind of got snubbed, I think, at the end of the year and not getting to be a host in the regional. Go ahead and take care of business in Florida. I don't think that was necessarily a shock or a surprise. A lot of people picked OU to win that. But then you go to the number 4 overall seed in Virginia Tech, and we won't dwell a whole lot on this particular series because we're a couple days removed at this point. The focus is on what's happening in Omaha at this point. But you go in and you take down the number 4 team, and I don't know, it didn't feel like there was a whole lot of drama because even after Saturday's loss, you thought, hey, we've got Cade Horton, we've got Trevin Michael in the bullpen coming out to close that. We feel really good about that, but the team just came out on fire, making the types of plays that get you to Omaha. The desperation, you saw Kendall Pettis with 2 diving catches. You saw Blake Robertson make a diving catch in the bottom of the 9th to make an out there on the toss to Trevin Michael. Trevin Michael himself was fantastic. Faced, I think, 12 batters and struck out 8 of them across Friday and Sunday's games. So this team just continues to peak. They continue to go beyond what pretty much anyone thought that they could. And here they are in Omaha, and it feels pretty special.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think what I'm most impressed by with this baseball team is that when I tuned in to watch, I didn't jinx it. They overcame my power to lose games as soon as I turn on the TV and watch OU baseball. So I know we were chatting the first time I turned it on. It was like what two runs for Virginia Tech, and I was like, oh boy, I'm about to do this. I'm gonna ruin their season. But they turned it around. It was impressive. But I'll be honest, Adam, just across the landscape of college baseball last weekend, upsets left and right, obviously including OU. But I do have to ask because all I've seen on Twitter and stuff is about Tennessee. And like, this was the greatest team ever and probably the most arrogant team ever. So setting aside OU baseball just for a quick second, is this just like karma catching up to Tennessee baseball? Does it feel fitting? You followed it more than I have.
Yeah, it does. And it couldn't have happened to a better fan base and a better team. I think there was even a point, I think it was on Friday's game, where some of the fans were throwing trash on the field. It's like, just like football. And it's the same fans, apparently. It felt so right. Notre Dame, I know a lot of people are not big Notre Dame fans, but that's a very old, very mature team that the Irish have. And so if you listen to the people that were plugged into college baseball, this wasn't a huge shock or a surprise. I think some people even picked Notre Dame to go in and win that. But it's kind of amazing. People thought, hey, this is one of the best teams that we've seen in a long time. I think the first team since the 90s to lead the entire country in both ERA and home runs. So wow. Incredibly balanced, and they don't even make it out of super regionals, which if you want to talk about how that relates for OU, that's a team that OU would have faced and had on their side of the bracket in all likelihood. So Notre Dame, a very, very good team, but I think you like your odds against the Irish as opposed to Tennessee there. Yeah. So And then the upsets on the other side of the bracket too. You've got Auburn, you've got Ole Miss. Um, both teams playing really hot. Auburn, a team that OU beat in the very first game of the year, 3-0,
That's right.
the only shutout of the entire season for this pitching staff, kind of ironically. And that feels like ages and ages ago. That the OU team that played that game and the Auburn team that played that game are not the same teams today.
Yep.
But yeah, it feels like such a wide open field that is really out there for the taking. Texas is the betting favorite at this point, but I don't think OU's scared of Texas. We split that 4 games this year, 2-2, and we're ready to go head to head with them if we have to. It looks like we might, since they're on our side of the bracket as well.
Well, give us a preview here, Adam. We got Texas A&M on Thursday, I believe. Correct?
Correct, at
Correct.
1:00 Central. Yep.
Yep. Give us a preview of what the highs and lows for the Aggies. What we should be watching out for.
So Texas A&M feels a lot like what OU is at this point. Basically, they haven't lost a weekend series since April 3rd when they played Alabama, and they haven't lost an NCAA tourney yet. Now, all of those games have been at home in College Station at Bluebell Park. Probably one of the craziest, home atmospheres in all of college baseball. You get those weird cult followers that show up and do all their weird, yells and arm motions. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's been like necessarily an easy road, but it's been a much easier path to be able to play all those games at home than what OU has had to go through at this point. So it'll be a little bit more difficult for them. But in regards to the trajectory of this team, they were kind of on the outside looking in. They were not ranked in the preseason. I think D1 Baseball did not have them in their preseason NCAA tournament field at all. But I guess their star has risen a little bit higher than OU's, simply because they play in the SEC, if you ask me.
Sure.
A little SEC bias, playing a little bit better teams, so their wins are probably a little bit better. But to me, they look a lot like OU as far as just the level of team. So I don't think it's necessarily one that OU needs to be scared of. Doesn't mean that OU is like the big favorite here or anything like that, but a team that certainly OU should be able to beat. Now, the tough part is going to be the bullpen. Their starter, we're most likely getting Nathan Detmer, right-hander, to start. That's fine. He's a good pitcher. He's not necessarily like someone that is going to be able to shut OU down, in my opinion. It's really what's going to come out of that bullpen. You've got some left-handers, most notably Joseph Menifee and then Jake Palish, who's the closer. Those two guys are both left-handers. That's the guys that have given OU the most trouble, is those lefties, especially out of the pen. So I think the key part of beating this team really is going to be, hey, can you get up to a 3-4 run lead quickly, get the starter off the mound, and then can you at least hold the water and continue somewhat against those lefties out of the bullpen? Don't just completely fall in a hole like we saw the Sooners do on Saturday against Virginia Tech, and then the previous Saturday against Florida when they brought a lefty out of the bullpen. If they can maintain there, I think that'll put OU in a really great position to win this game.
Adam, setting aside your crimson glasses, if you're looking at the field there in Omaha, if you were to put money on a betting favorite of who walks out there with the title, who would you pick? It does seem wide open.
It really does. It really does. Texas is the betting favorite according to Vegas. And I think that is the safe money. On the other side, you do have Stanford, the number 2 overall seed. Very few overall seeds actually came to Omaha. You've got Texas, who was a 9. You've got Auburn, I think was like a 15, 16. Stanford was a 2. And then there's probably someone else that I'm missing off the top of my head. But a lot of 2s, a lot of 3s making it. Ole Miss might be the hottest team in the country right now. Yeah. They had enough talent to be ranked in the top 5 preseason, a lot of polls, and then kind of lost their way, but have found it here at the end of the year. Same thing with Arkansas, another top 5 projected team. I guess if I was making a bet that I thought would pay off, I feel like Ole Miss would probably be that one. But man, it feels like every team is beatable for OU. It feels like everybody. And maybe if OU hadn't played Texas at this point, maybe I would be more scared of them because of the heavy hitters they have there. But the fact that we've been there, we came out 500 on the year so far. That's not really a giant that necessarily scares me necessarily. They may end up beating OU. Any of these teams can beat OU. But I think at the same time, OU can beat any of these teams too. So you have to love your chances.
Yeah, amazing to see our future SEC brethren. If I'm looking correctly, 6 out of the 8 teams, either current or future SEC teams, pretty impressive. You could say something very similar, not to quite to the extent of the Women's College World Series. Obviously, OU and Texas, two future SEC teams playing for the national title there. So definitely moving into a tougher conference on the baseball side, I would think, as we go forward. But for Adam, as far as maybe some things that people who don't follow OU baseball as much, what are some things about Omaha that maybe we should know heading into this weekend?
Yeah. So if you're watching our YouTube video or seeing some of the clips on our social media, I have Rosenblatt as my Zoom background here, but that is not where the Sooners will be playing. Since actually OU played in the last College World Series that took place in the stadium back in 2010, and since has moved a little closer to downtown Omaha to what is now Charles Schwab Field, holds about 24,000 fans. I'm curious to see what the OU turnout's going to be like. Other than Arkansas, we're the closest fan base to Omaha. So hoping we see a lot of Sooners there supporting the team. It's not a ballpark known for a lot of home runs. Now, that's not going to matter too much, I think, for the game against A&M. They only have a couple more home runs, maybe like 10, 15 more than OU does as a team. And so I do think that helps favor OU if you're going up against some other teams. There's not really a team in this field that I would say is reliant on home runs, but some definitely hit more than others. So OU's definitely had more home runs as of late, but it's a team that their bread and butter is manufacturing runs, stealing bases. And that out of all the teams here, OU, I think, has the most stolen bases by almost double the next closest team,
Wow.
and leads the field as far as stolen bases and walks out of all the teams. So if there's any team that is really going to find ways to get across the plate, I feel like that's OU. So this ballpark can help play in their favor there. So I think, man, maybe I'm talking myself into it. Maybe my maybe my crimson colored glasses are
Don't do
on,
this to yourself.
but but still at the same time, it's like this program was not supposed to be here. We're picked 6th in the Big 12. We still have national media catching up to what this program has done. Even before the series in Blacksburg, I heard so many people saying, "Oh, well, I don't know about this OU team. The ERA is not great." And it's like, yeah, that's true if you look at the overall season statistics. They don't tell the full story though. I mean, this
Yeah.
team is just on fire as of the last 2 months, really. At this point, you look at your core 4 pitchers, your Cade Horton, your David Sandlin, your Jake Bennett, and then your closer Trevin Michael. They are giving up a 3.36 ERA here in the postseason. Like that's a huge difference from the
Unreal.
overall team ERA, which is still in the 5s, I think, or 6 even. So, um, and now you get a schedule that's a little more spaced out. The Sooners play Friday, they play Sunday, win or lose. And then if they are winning consistently, then they don't play again until Wednesday. So you have a lot of space between games. I think you can use Trevin Michael pretty much every game, if he's just doing an inning or two to close out games. So again, the season gets shorter, the rest gets longer, and it continues to play in the favor and to the strength, I think, of this OU team, which is still your hitting, but your pitching has come a long way to help support that hitting. So it's going to be exciting. I mean, it doesn't come along very often that this team is in Omaha, and I'm hopeful. I'm excited to see more and more OU fan support, which I guess kind of brings up an interesting question because you're an OU fan that is probably more typical of the average OU fan out there.
Agreed. Yeah.
Do you think that baseball making the World Series feels different than, I guess, some of the other accomplishments of other programs?
I would think so. I mean, especially if you compare it and something we unfortunately have to do. I think, unfortunately, for baseball's sake, you have to compare it to softball,
Yeah.
and that's a very unfair advantage most conversations. But softball was expected to win it all. If they wouldn't have gotten to winning the championship or even to the championship series, it would have been a significant disappointment. Where if OU, let's be honest, if OU goes into Blacksburg and loses, I still think most people would be like, overall, pretty good season, rounded out really good, like
Yeah.
takes momentum into next season. But the fact they've made it to Omaha, I don't think it's a bigger accomplishment than what softball's been able to do, but I think it's a more surprising, into the season than what you saw on the other diamond. So It's definitely something I think the program should be proud of, and I think it's definitely like I said, kind of a more surprising end of the season than what softball did.
It is interesting because out of all the programs out there, and there's kind of your core 4 or 5, your football, men's, women's basketball, baseball, and softball. Those are your biggest, most noteworthy
Sure,
sports. Even as successful as gymnastics and some of the others have been, baseball is going to have a wider fan base just because it's a more mainstream sport.
sure,
But baseball is probably, I don't know if they're the most long suffering, but they have had success. Like, this is traditionally a very good baseball program. And we had a gap there of almost 10 years from our last super regional, 12 years from our last College World Series appearance. And there's lots of fans still left around from, those winning days of Sonny Galloway. And it kind of feels like the long suffering fans are being rewarded at this point.
yeah,
You've got a lot of guys that, this is a really big deal for. Skip Johnson making his return to Omaha, Toby Rowland, a huge baseball guy. And I think he said on the radio the other day that when he took this job as the broadcaster at OU, like, this was the one thing that he wanted to do, was to call a game in the College World Series.
wow,
So it feels kind of special. Kind of feels like a little bit of a return. I don't want to say that yet and talk about the program going into next year, because let's enjoy what we
sure,
have now. But it does feel different. Softball, football, you expect to be there. Men's basketball, making a Final Four every once in a while is not
sure.
crazy. It just, I don't know, it feels a little different. But I was
Well,
curious if,
I am gonna ask you about the
yeah,
future though, because a big question I think I've been thinking through, especially over this past week, is at the beginning of the season and really probably Skip's entire tenure here at OU, outside of 1 year that there's a big question mark when OU is actually a really solid team. And unfortunately, the season got cut short. There's been some questions about Skip and can he lead this program to what the program should be. Do you feel more confident that this is kind of a 1 year wonder? Skip is the team's just hot. Coaching doesn't matter as much when a team gets this hot. Or do you believe this can be something that Skip can build off of and make coming to Omaha more of a consistent thing?
the interesting thing about college baseball right now that OU fans don't have to be concerned about is the transfer portal now. And we're
Mm,
seeing a lot of teams that didn't make the postseason get kind of wrecked a little bit on the roster. OU is fortunate that, our young guys and some of the guys that maybe are looking for a new home, like, why would you be looking for a new home at this point anyway? You're
yeah,
going to Omaha. So that's kind of interesting. And that could throw a wrench in it. I wonder how he will handle the transfer era of college baseball.
mm,
We're not going to find out this year, which is great. But, you know, that 2020 season is so hard. Like, how do you measure it? Because OU could have been the Tennessee of that year and not even made it to Omaha. And then
yeah,
do you view it differently? Or do they go to Omaha and win it all? Like, were they just that good? Like, we have no idea.
mm,
And that team, I think, made it to what, mid-March, which,
that sounds right.
yeah, that's when everything shut down. And at that point in this season, OU was losing a series to New Orleans. So
Yeah,
who knows where that season, it could have gone way down, it could have gone way up. We just have no idea. So I guess I'm talking a lot to give you a non-answer. I have no idea at this point, but you have to love what he's done to this
sure.
point, and he's bought himself, at least a few more years at minimum
Yeah,
in Norman if he chooses to stay. Now I know we've heard some different things, rumors about maybe he was looking elsewhere after last year, but hey, keep on the bandwagon. Keep rolling
yeah,
with this. You got a good thing. You've got some new recruits coming in. You got some transfers. We got one from Baylor that's hit over 300 last year. So the ceiling looks high for
yeah.
Skip in this program. So
There
we
you
shall
go.
see. I've got
Anything else for the listeners out at?
I've got two quick X factors. I
Okay,
could sit here and gush for a long time about baseball, but we do have to give some props to softball. But two X factors. I'll give you one pitching and one on the hitting and the batter's box there. For pitching, it will be interesting to see if Cade Horton is your day 3 starter, or rather your game 3 starter at this point, because of the spacing. You play Friday, you're guaranteed to play Sunday, win or lose, in the winners or losers bracket. Cade Horton, by all accounts, incredibly hot right now. Probably your 1A to 1B with Jake Bennett as your starter. Do you go with Cade Horton on Sunday, depending on matchup, or if you're in the losers bracket, or do you save him for the game 3, whatever that might be? That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In the batter's box, Blake Robertson, he's only hitting 230 in the postseason. This was a guy that at his peak in the middle of the year against Kansas had a 392 average and was like top 5 in walks in all of college baseball. And he's really slowed down. He's batting in that 3-hole in the lineup. So you would love to see him kind of hit that groove again. You've got other guys like Tanner Treadaway that are hitting over 500 in postseason. Peyton Graham, always a clutch hit in his arsenal. All the way down the lineup, Kendall Pettis is batting phenomenally. He was the most outstanding player in the regional. Can Blake Robertson kind of come back and make a reappearance as the dominant guy at the plate he was, whether that's just get on base with a walk or start hitting some of those doubles. He was hitting a ton of doubles in the middle of the year. I think if he can get back, this lineup gets really, really ultra scary. It's already scary right now, but that takes you to a whole new level. So hopefully we can see him come back and make a big contribution when it matters most. But
Adam, before we move on from baseball,
yeah,
again, I'm going to have to ask you to take off the crimson glasses. Wouldn't you like to see an A&M versus Texas matchup at some point? Like whether they both win or they both lose. We know in our neck of the woods, like how much that rivalry means. Obviously, we love them both to lose, right? And then they can play each other in an elimination game. But for the fandom, for just the classic, college sports fan, you kind of got to root for that. Just like obviously you want OU to win, but that would be a juicy matchup in Omaha.
Yeah, so I will take that in the losers bracket, and OU can face Notre Dame in game 2. And then I guess to take that one step further, Arkansas, I think, is the only team on the other side of the bracket that's interesting as far as a matchup for OU. The others are kind of like, who cares? But an OU Arkansas College World Series finals would be, or final, who knows?
Yeah.
Finals. That could be really fun and interesting there. So,
yeah.
So let's talk softball.
Let's talk softball. I feel like it's old news now, Adam. We're a week away or a week removed from OU winning its back-to-back championship. It's 6 overall under Coach Gasso. Adam, it's unbelievable what this program is. If dynasty was a question a couple weeks back, it's not anymore. This is a dynasty. This is up there now with the UConn basketball, Alabama football kind of conversation. It's amazing. And you look at the last 2 seasons, combined record of 115-7. That's video game stuff. It really is unreal, but we have heard enough about the game. Everybody knows we whack Texas left and right. But let's talk about something. I think that it's a more engaging conversation here, and that's discussing where does this team rank all time, which is really hard to do because softball over the past maybe decade has really improved as far as its level of competition. The amount of teams, I say that there's only been like 4 or 5 teams that have won it. The amount of teams who have the ability to win a national championship. But you look at this Sooners program right now, this season at 59-3, where do they rank kind of all time? And one of the things that actually stood out to me as I started researching this team doesn't even close to as far as having the most wins of a single team in the past few years. You look at last year, 2017, this OU team had 61 wins. Florida in 15 had 60, Bama in 12 had 60, Arizona had 60 in 2011, and then Arizona State back in 2008 had 66 wins. So it's not necessarily as much about the wins as it is about the amount of losses. And that's where I think this conversation gets interesting. Outside of Arizona in 1994, who had 3 losses, they also had 64 wins, and UCLA in 92, who was 54-2. Those are the only 2 teams that had 2 losses or less in a single season. And both of those teams are playing in a time where, again, it's not as competitive as what it is now. Back then, it was basically a Pac-12 championship because that's the only teams who won it because West Coast has just been notably different when it comes to softball. But Adam, they've got to be in the conversation of the top 3 college softball teams of all time, right?
I would say number 1, simply because it's always hard in any sport at any level to measure teams from one era to another. Sure. But I think it's even harder when you say, well, it's softball, a sport that is still maturing at this point. It's not reached its full maturation. It's still growing. the money and the resources that are available to these girls and these teams, to whether that's in training, in coaching, in nutrition, whatever it might be. It's a totally different experience today than it was for that 1992 UCLA team. And
Yep.
and just like in football, for example, the type of athlete, the size, the speed difference is different than it was back then.
Yep.
So I guess you're really just talking, is it more impressive to have two losses or three losses at that point?
Yeah.
And I have to say it's still OU at this point, because the competition had to have been better. It had to have been more balanced.
Yeah.
Whereas it was much more West Coast dominated back then. Anyone that was good on the East Coast was probably trying to get over to the West Coast to play. Now it is
Mhm.
much more balanced nationwide. And then also, I think you take into account the recruiting factor of, there are a lot of good softball players in the state of Oklahoma, just because of what this program has done and made people want to play that in high school. But
Oklahoma State as well.
at Oklahoma State, yeah, look at like Rogers State, and like USAO's got a good softball program. Like,
Yeah.
everybody is, but at the same time, getting and giving half scholarships to a lot of these players. Same
Mm.
thing with baseball. So you're kind of somewhat limited with what's in your state to some level.
Sure.
Whereas California, much bigger state, much more resources, much more players to go after at that point. So
Yeah.
I think it's more impressive what OU's done.
I would agree, and I think I'd be curious, and you'll have to forgive me. I did not go look up the '94 Arizona and '92 UCLA teams' records, how they won, but the way this team won throughout the season, and honestly, just sheer dominating fact and performance outside of those three deals. But I mean, one of those losses to Oklahoma State, I believe that one went into extra innings. Texas was close up until the very end. It was really outside of that UCLA loss where UCLA pretty much controlled the game. That was kind of the only really definitive loss. The others were like could have gone either way. So this team could have easily been, 61-1 on the season if a few things just go. Which, I mean, we're being greedy at this point. But that being said, let's transition now to, where does this team rank in OU sports history? Because it's got to be up at the top. And I know we put together a list here, so a few teams maybe compare last year's softball team, 56-4, national champion. 2013 softball, 57-4, national championship. 2019 women's gym goes undefeated. Pick a team between the 2013 and 2018 men's gymnastics, because they were just winning left and right. But then you start getting into, some of the football stuff, the 2000 team, the 74, 75, 85 Switzer titles. And then, of course, you added this one on here, which I thought was a great point. Anywhere between 1953 to 57, 47 straight wins. Those are really hard to compare. You can't really put them side by side. But just as a sheer fan, where do you put this team in just kind of the history of OU athletics?
So I really can't compare it to the gymnastics programs. As great as they've been, there's much fewer teams competing for that title. So just your odds go up just in nature of that. The 2000 football team, as special as that season was, and as much as fans love that, even they were living by the skin of their teeth in several games, and that was not
Right.
how this softball team is. And then, to me, I added that 53 to 57, the 47 straight football wins there. That one's interesting. I don't know how you compare that, because that is multiple teams, multiple different players that were involved there. Same coach, obviously, but that feat itself is pretty incredible, and it stood the test of time so far. And it's also, you have to take into account, this was just about the turn of when teams that were west of Chicago started getting some notice, or maybe I should say west of Minneapolis even,
Sure.
because Minnesota was great in the 20s. But this was kind of an era where you didn't get a whole lot of respect, just kind of like how softball was maybe 20 years ago. If you were
Sure.
on the East Coast, you weren't UCLA or Arizona. So a little bit different, but I feel like that's got to be the most comparable as far as like dominance to what this year's softball team was.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not as against comparing the women's gym program, because I do think the women's gym as a whole, I think it's about like 10 years behind where softball is now,
Yeah.
where you're seeing programs emerge, but the diversity is probably not quite there yet. But you could say the same thing about softball. Like, there's still just it's a bigger than what it used to be, but there's still a small group of teams year in, year out who have the actual chance to win a national championship. So I don't think it's as separated as maybe you feel, but that's all about perspective. But I agree with you. Really, outside of that 47 straight wins, which is difficult because it is multiple teams, like you mentioned, I mean, they're right there. I would put this team over the two 2021 and 2013 softball teams. Just if obviously I think having a healthy Jordy Ball against some of those bats, especially last year, and going up against Kalani Ricketts and that entire group would be an entertaining matchup if both teams are healthy. But it's got to be up at the top for me. The way this team dominated, and again, 53-57, that football team, it's so long ago.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of hard to compare. So for me, if I had to pick one team where I'm like, this is the best team in OU history, it's got to be this one. But before we move on from softball, the rich get richer. One thing, transfer portal is already in play. Patty's already at work. Alex Storako commits to OU, the Michigan starting pitcher of the last few seasons. 1 year of eligibility left. She was the Big Ten first team, or she was on the Big Ten first team for the last 2 seasons and the Big Ten pitcher of the year last year. 25-8 on the season with a 1.71 ERA, which again, I talked about us getting greedy. That seems like a massive ERA in comparison to many of our pitchers that we've seen over the years, but that's actually pretty damn good. And you would think that the pitching staff under Jenna Rocha can really get that number down even more. But Adam, you look at Ball, you look at the number one pitcher in the class, and Deal coming in now. You look at Storako, Nicole May. A lot of people assume she was out the door. That has not been made public yet. If it is going to be made public, it's very possible Nicole May is coming back. As I say that, I expect a tweet at 80 seconds saying she's heading to the transfer portal because that's my luck. But the pitching staff was really good this year. It's scary what to think of what they could be next year if Nicole May stays and can play at her peak performance, because we saw it against Texas. When Nicole May is on, she's really, really good. But when she's off, she's really, really just mediocre, to be frank. So if that pitching staff can be at its best, it's scary what the Sooners can be here in 2023.
Yeah. Another name that's kind of been on the radar that the Sooners might not be done in the portal here, but I know people have mentioned Alina Torres out of Arizona State.
There you go.
She hit 339 last year. So, and that's only going to go up if she does decide to go to OU. Listed as an infielder, but I imagine she could play outfield if the Sooners needed her to. I know we'll be looking for someone to replace Jana Johns at third base. So that could be potential there. But yeah, the rich continue to get richer. So
it'll be interesting.
Crazy.
This roster was built to protect Jocelyn Alo. I know a lot of teams walked her earlier this season, and rightfully so. But as you get in deeper and deeper in the season, you can't do that when you have Tiara Jennings sitting right behind her.
Yeah.
Who now is going to protect Jennings like they were protecting, like she protected Alo, this past season? Is it a healthy? Oh gosh,
Alyssa Brito or Grace Lyons
Brito,
are the two that come to mind for me.
Grace Lyons, but you even think of like a Kinsey Hansen. When Kinsey Hansen's been healthy, she's actually been really solid.
Yeah.
And so, does this next 5-6 months allow her to get healthy and become kind of that spot behind her? So there are definitely going to be question marks in this lineup, but in Patty we trust. I'm sure we'll be just fine.